Great. So, hey, thanks folks so much for joining us this evening for our Koda Connections. We're really excited today to Meredith Thivierge with us to really chat about next level nutrition. Very excited to be able to offer these opportunities for our folks just to build a little bit of community with one another, ask questions, and really delve into what our speakers have here. Very excited to have Meredith. She, has a bachelor's of science in food science with a concentration in nutrition from Clemson, and is currently a pediatric diabetes dietitian at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and she's been there for quite a while and does have some camp experience, and can really speak to that. As she goes through the presentation and chat, we really would love for this to go both ways in the conversation. Please in the chat type in any and all questions you have, or if you need clarification, I'll be monitoring that and we can make sure that we get all of those answers met. But really, this is a great time to just sit back, learn a little bit, and just ask questions and really get your needs met. So with that, I'll hand it over to Meredith and take it away.
All right, well, thanks. I'm glad everybody was willing to meet. Like I said, like Ian said, I'm Meredith. And so my thought was, first, I wanted to kind of get a feel for kind of what people are interested in learning about, because I have things I can definitely talk about, but just definitely if you're hoping to learn about something or have certain questions, I would love to be able to answer them. Definitely, like Ian said, I would love for it to be interactive and be very casual, hopefully, in a nice, good conversation. So does anybody that's on right now have questions or things they were wondering about, I would love to discuss.
Are you, this is Adam Kofsky. I can't figure out how to change it from my wife's name. But
You said Adam?
Yes. I went to Camp Homey, Dakota from 1977 to like 83, I think, roughly. So I'm 52 years old, almost 52 years old. I have just had a hard time finding a dietitian that can help with the diabetic diet, like where they say, and I don't know if you're going to cover this, but I'm getting older and getting heavier. And when I get low, that's my biggest Achilles heel is I'll be great all day and then I'll exercise and then I'll get low and then I'll do a temp basal and then I'll get high. And, I just, that balancing act is what I struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple different things. So, I can definitely talk about diet, with what kind of my perspective is on types of diets. Treating lows is like the hardest thing because you feel the worst and you want that low to go away as quick as possible. And people tend to overeat or overtreat, or it's just, if you're having lots of lows, that's extra maybe calories and it's usually, pure sugar stuff because you need it to go quick. So it really takes you up to get you to come up. And so you're playing that yo-yo game. So a couple different things I usually say, like if you're noticing every time you exercise that you are dropping, is that temp basal, I would actually, I don't know if people usually do it with exercise, is thinking about decreasing your basal rate an hour before you even start, while you're doing it, and then 2 hours after, to try to prevent that low so that you're not having to overtreat. If you have to treat though, usually things that I try to do is trying to have individual packaged items, even instead of having and keeping a container of orange juice, only having a 4 ounce box, like a baby box, because that way, hopefully once it's done, it's less likely that you're going to just pour another if it's just a box. So trying to do that. But I think definitely, I think a lot of times people think having multiple lows is just what you have to deal with. But I think if you're noticing lows or you're having more frequent ones or certain, trying to write down when you're having them, because hopefully the best way to do is just prevent these lows by do you need to adjust your exercise insulin or, regimen that way. Is that answering your question, or you were hoping for some, you want me to try to take it a different way?
No, I mean, again, I didn't know if you were covering this and what you were planning on talking about. So I just meant it kind of as a high level category. How do you find a good dietitian? How do you find someone that can really adjust to your needs? When, your traditional doctor's office and even the endocrinologist's office might not have somebody, surprisingly, that can really work with you.
So definitely, I mean, I think big thing though is like regardless, if you go somewhere and you don't seem to either, mesh with them, I do think it's something, giving somebody more than one chance, but kind of saying exactly what you're saying. That's like what you're looking for. I definitely think having somebody, when possible, having somebody who is a certified diabetes educator, because then hopefully that means that they have been very immersed in diabetes and they kind of have more understanding of the ins and outs. I mean, when possible, if you have somebody who also has type 1 diabetes, that can be very helpful because they have the best perspective because they themselves are also managing. Now in our center, it's a little different because all of our diabetes outpatient centers has a dietitian automatically during their endocrine appointment. And I know that's not the same in the adult, in adult settings. Often, usually you have to have a separate appointment. But trying to find somebody, I definitely think different things could be like if your doctor is connected to a major hospital, even asking their Department of Nutrition, if they have an outpatient clinic, do they have somebody who specializes in diabetes? And a good way to know if they are specialized is if they are a CDE. Not to say that all who are CDEs are going to be perfect or going to match what you're looking for, but I think that can help with understanding both, understanding kind of what you're looking for and also the difference in type 1 versus type 2, which can be major because I think get people that when if they're a dietitian and maybe they only see type 2 in their regular nutrition clinic, so they may not quite understand that there is a difference in how you manage and how things work with food. So I think with finding, definitely, I think searching for someone who's certified diabetes educator, I would ask your local hospitals if they have a diabetes dietitian and asking if they are certified, especially if your endocrinologist doesn't have one that he recommends. That's definitely where I think having like social media community and asking people in your area, if you have like a diabetes group, like, do you have, asking other people, do you have a dietitian that you like or don't like, so that you don't have to, you can kind of hopefully search out, because definitely I think people, your community of people with diabetes might be very helpful because they're also having to find somebody. And if they found a dietitian that seems to work well for them, I think definitely giving, looking for them for support can be helpful.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Let's see, do other people have questions or things that they wanted me to talk about or try to answer? No? Okay, well, feel free. Like Ian said, I think you guys can always put things in the chat if you think of things. I was going to talk about a few things that I guess consider it, more advanced nutrition, but also just thinking about more in-depth nutrition, things that can be helpful. But before I start, just to get a feel for everybody is if you feel comfortable saying if it's you as the adult or the child who has diabetes, and then how long you've had diabetes, and then if you use injection, that way it'll just help me kind of when we're talking.
I was still unmuted. This is Adam. I've been type 1. I just actually got the medal from Jocelyn for 51 years, but for over 50, and mini med pump and a Dexcom.
Okay, great.
I'm Sarah Vicarone. My daughter Violet was just diagnosed in September. So we are just trying to, navigate the transition into, a whole new, a whole new lifestyle. She just started on a pump in December. She's on the Omnipod, and she has the Dexcom too. So we're very thankful to have gotten access to the devices and everything so quickly. But at this point, my daughter's 6, and I think that the biggest hurdle right now is trying to still allow her the freedom to eat the things that she wants and not be too restrictive, but also trying to manage blood sugar, the roller coaster. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, great. That's good. That will be very helpful when I'm talking.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I've been type 1 for 29 years, and I'm on a Medtronic pump and CGM.
Great. Are you on the Medtronic CGM?
No, my pump works with the Guardian sensors.
Okay, yep.
I have a 12-year-old son who was diagnosed at 5. We are on the Tandem T-Slim full automation.
Great.
Hi, I'm Laura. I came on late, so I don't know if it was my turn or not.
Sure, it can be anybody's turn.
I have had type 1 diabetes for 29 years.
Hi.
This is Abigail. I take shots a day, and I have the Dexcom G6 CGM.
I think it might be my turn.
I think so.
My name's Tim Zeller. My son just turned 6. He was diagnosed type 1 about a year and a half ago, and he is on the Dexcom and Omnipod.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have a nice, good mixture. I really like that. So the thing that I'm gonna share my screen in just a second. Okay, so some things that I was going to talk about, and some of this is pediatrics, but actually this graph relates to everybody. And this kind of shows the average A1C versus your A1C goal range. So, you know, children, A1C goal is less than 7, but this graph, why I like to bring it up is because I think people need to understand that diabetes is very hard. And I think especially for newer families, you know, when you get that A1C at your clinic visits, it can be very frustrating, or you kind of feel a little defeated if it's not at that goal. But this graph kind of shows that, you know, the younger children sometimes have an easier time getting towards that A1C goal. And then you kind of notice that A1C starts creeping up as they enter more of like teenhood, a young adulthood. And then you see it start to come back down into more of an average range. And that's as you enter adulthood and you maybe are figuring things out. And why I like to just show this is that, you know, as kids transition from parents doing kind of all their management and caring into independence, it can be really hard. Plus just diabetes is really hard as you enter, you know, teenhood, collegehood, and you want to be more social and independent. Sometimes you just don't have diabetes. So, you know, I think it is important to see that, you know, management is hard. Now, granted, this graph was done before, you know, everything with more of the Dexcom G6s and a lot of the, you know, a hybrid closed loop system. So the A1C could be a little bit easier, but I still think it's important to know that, you know, we have these goals set and because of what, you know, we want for long-term prognosis, but it should just be seen that it's not just as easy as, okay, eat a certain thing. Because even if you eat perfectly or, you know, you have to balance it out, so that just to see that it's okay for to take a little time to get your A1C into that goal range. So go ahead. I'm sorry. Does someone want to say something? No? Okay. Okay, so for dosing, I don't know if everybody is already dosing 15 minutes before eating, but that's something I like to just start out with, that if you aren't already dosing before, working towards that, just that studies help show that you can really decrease that after meal rise. And thinking about it, that like most of your carbs will show up in your bloodstream within 2 hours. But it does take the insulin a little bit of time to start working. So trying to make sure that you're dosing before. And I think a lot of people sometimes get nervous, like what happens if I don't finish what I'm eating and I've already given myself insulin? So usually I tell people, you know, at the very least, try to think about your average of what you're eating, and then you can always tack it on at the end. Or having kind of figuring out what it is that you would always feel comfortable eating if you were like, well, I fell short 10 carbs. What is it that I could eat, especially for children, when younger kids who, it may not be as easy, but kind of thinking about, like, for my daughter, I feel confident that she would eat yogurt every meal, every snack if I let her. So yogurt is a good backup that I could, if I estimated that I thought that she was going to eat 50 carbs at dinner and she only ate 40, that I could give her a small yogurt drink to make up for those carbs. Other things that I usually think about for when you're thinking about more advanced nutrition, when blood sugars just aren't going the way that you think they should, and you feel like you have your carb counting down correctly, is thinking about what's in the food. So I know many of you have pumps, and then if you don't have a pump, it still can be done in a similar way with split dosing. But things to think about is using your extended bolus function. So things that have higher fat mixed in with your carbs tend to delay your spike. Fat will take the longest to digest. So what can happen is when you have fat in your foods, that instead of it hitting your bloodstream, within those 2 hours, it could really be 5 or 6 hours later because that fat took longer. So usually thinking about that, your fat is taking longer, your insulin's already working. So some people actually see when they're having these mixed dishes that they actually they start almost dropping to a low point, and then it could be 4 or 5 hours later, and always tends to happen, right as you're trying to go to bed or in the middle of the night, that you end up then having this spike much later. So trying to use that extended bolus function can be helpful because you can actually play around with how much you give. So examples of these is definitely your takeout pizza. Because of that, it doesn't seem that like frozen pizza will have the same effect. And it's probably because frozen pizza is less greasy. You definitely, most of your takeout pizzas are they're very greasy. That's why it makes sense why people tend to really love them, because they are delicious. But it can wreak havoc on your blood sugar. So usually I would say trying to give your extended bolus. When you're on injections, you can still mimic it by saying, if you needed 10 units for pizza, you give 5 up front, and then you could give the other 5 maybe 1 to 2 hours later. Usually I tell people is if you're feeling like you want to try extended bolus, trying it at a lunchtime, just so that you can watch your numbers without trying to do it right before bedtime. And it sounds like everybody, I think, is on some sort of continuous glucose sensor, so that it makes it very easy, so you can kind of see where you're headed, where your blood sugar's headed. And usually what I say with extended, I think a lot of times people don't extend enough, where people will only extend 1 hour. And for pizza, especially for pizza, I find that you probably need 3 or 4 hours extended. So kind of not being afraid to do a little bit longer extension, especially when it's greasy. I think other foods that tend to be similar could be like your takeout Chinese food, because it also is that carby, sugary, fatty food.
So for shots, like I'm taking a shot. So are you saying that I take the second half like 3 hours later for pizza?
So
I
wouldn't
always have trouble with pizza.
Yeah, so shots are a little harder because you can't quite. So with a pump, what happens is those you did 5 up front and then 5 later. The 5 on the pump trickles in over those next few hours. You can't quite do that. But what I would say is I would probably wait like an hour to an hour or so, maybe hour and a half before you give that second shot. Only because that insulin, usually by around 3 hours, 2 hours, it really, like by 2 hours, it's peaked and everything, so that you're kind of giving your body a chance, so that you're not giving all of it at once, so that you shouldn't see, may not drop as low. But then if you give it an hour later, you kind of give it more of a tail end to catch, to see if it can like catch that from spiking that. And that part, I would say this is definitely still trial and error on, for everybody, whether you're a pump or injections, because, you have to kind of wait and see, you could do only 1 hour and then you're like, oh, that didn't do much. So then maybe next time you have it, you say, okay, I'm going to wait, 90 minutes before I give that second shot. The one thing to note is if you're on T-Slim and on controliq, the max you can extend is 2 hours. And that being that, extended bolus, it may not work as well with controliq because of it already kind of is watching your blood sugar. So it starts kind of doing that extended bolus work for you because it's starting to give you that correction when it's seeing you drop out of the range. So I haven't actually recommended people on controliq to use the extended bolus function, because I'm not quite sure if it would do enough because of controliq being able to kind of, fix you, whether you're starting to drop or, in the beginning and then rising later, it'll start to give those auto corrections. And then with the Medtronic, if you're on the 670G, in order to do an extended bolus, I believe you have to come out of auto mode. So you would have to come out of it and then remember to go back into it if you thought that it would be helpful, and if you found that when you're in auto mode, it still doesn't quite catch those highs. Does anybody use extended bolus, whether they found that it works well or found that it works terribly? Because I always like to hear what people's perspectives are if they've used it, whether they like it or they don't like it.
We definitely used it early on, both for pizza initially, but we stopped using it for that, but still for bagels.
Okay, what do you like to do for bagels?
Like 70% up front and like a 3-hour extension.
Yeah, so I was about to say, so bagels aren't necessarily super fatty. So when things are more, I call them carby, like dense, like bagels, pancakes, sometimes using an extended bolus, but you give more up front because it's not necessary. It's just that like carb density tends to make you spike, and so trying to catch it a little bit, that you don't need that full extension because you're not necessarily overall going to drop because it's not as fatty. So I definitely have done that too, where I've told people with playing around, if you want to use that function, for like a pancake, like a more like sometimes like a French toast or like a French toast casserole, using something like that where you use 70 or 80% up front and only extend 20 to 30%. So I definitely can understand using it for a bagel. How do people feel about breakfast cereal? Does anybody avoid cereal or eat it, or found a way that it works well for blood sugar?
I avoid it.
Okay.
But I'm old enough where I, if I was a child or had a child, it'd probably, well, I have children, but it'd be different. I have the elder ability to say no to cereal.
Okay.
We have 5 kids. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Go ahead, please.
We have 5 kids, so I didn't want my diabetic to feel like he wasn't like the rest of them, and they all ate cereal. So he eats cereal as well.
Okay.
I started buying a cereal called Magic Spoon.
Mm-hmm.
That's lower in carbs and sugar, and both my kids, one who's type 1, one who's not, they love it, and that seems to work well for most.
We've switched to a similar thing, schoolyard snacks that is like keto, and it seems to satisfy her craving for cereal.
Okay. All right. So yes, cereal is, I feel like it is and I can't quite figure out why cereal above all it wreaks such havoc. I think it wreaks havoc more than people tend to say with like your bagels and pancakes. So for cereal, I have a couple different things I usually talk about that for trying to how to figure out cereal. So different things could be trying to use a different type of cereal. So the Magic Spoon or a product like that, where I believe it uses things like almond flour. It has higher fiber content, added protein to try to help curb the glycemic index, can be used. The one thing I do say is usually it can be quite costly. So I think, it's something that, it may not be something that if you have a larger family that everybody in the house could eat, because trying to budget it could get very expensive. It's not wrong to have that. I definitely think that's always an option. Other things that can be things that I try to tell people with cereal is that is definitely a time to pre-meal bolus. And I usually tell people at least 20 minutes before, try to bolus. Other things that tend to try to help curb that just huge spike usually with cereal is sometimes I'll tell people instead of just doing it a bowl of doing like a bowl of cereal with milk is maybe switching and actually doing like a yogurt parfait with the cereal, or like making the cereal a topper, where you kind of use it as like kind of like you would like take, it would be a smaller portion of that cereal, whatever cereal it is that you enjoy. But it would allow, so you could still enjoy it, but the portion is much smaller. And then if you're using kind of like a Greek yogurt or a higher protein yogurt, hopefully that protein with it will also help spike less. So that way, child or adult, you can still enjoy that cereal you like, but it's hopefully, you know, with it smaller portion and a more protein to go with it. Other options could be if it's a kid, especially if you're like, you know, they really love Honey Nut Cheerios, and that's by far not the highest sugar one. But a sugary cereal, like a kid's cereal that is try mixing it with a higher fiber, low sugar cereal, like a bran flake, just like a store brand bran flake. That bran has that fiber, you know, can help lower that glycemic load. So usually I tell people if you were eating 2 cups of cereal, make 1 cup the regular kid cereal and 1 cup that bran flake. So still getting that taste, but kind of trying to curb that, the amount of added sugar and just that starchiness. So those are different things. Other things that could be done is if you do buy a box of something like a Magic Spoon, or is actually mixing it with your regular cereal. So kind of, because what kind of with, and I was going to talk about glycemic index a little bit, is how the glycemic index and load can work is that to help lower it, there's different things. Fiber helps lower it. Healthy fats tend to lower it. Protein can help, but also mixing a higher glycemic food with a lower glycemic food can help overall lower that load that you see. So those are different ways to try to enjoy cereal and not kind of finding that balance of trying to enjoy it without feeling like I'm just going to either, you know, hopefully it doesn't have to always be, well, either I'm going to be really high or I just never can have cereal, like trying to find a way. Still trying to do it less often. So if you have children in the house, if normally, you know, it's hard. Cereal is a very easy weekday food item when you're trying to get to work and school. So cereal tends to be really convenient, but trying to maybe say, okay, we're only going to do cereal on Tuesdays and Fridays. So still can have it, but hopefully less often, just so that you're hopefully not battling highs. Or I say do it before, if it's a gym day, a gym class day. You know that your child's going to have gym in the morning. Cereal might not be so bad, because if you're running a little bit higher, then that gym class will bring you lower without going too low. Or, you know, the other thing could be is if you are somebody, whether it be your child or an adult, and you were going, if you know you tend to drop a lot when you exercise, cereal actually could be a pre-workout snack option. You probably don't need like a large bowl, but it would still be something where if you said, okay, I'm going to eat 3/4 of a cup of a cereal with a little bit of milk and before I exercise, that may help. If, since you don't make your blood sugar rise, could help you when you're exercising, that you don't drop too low or, while you're exercising.
What's the lowest carb milk or milk substitute would you recommend with the cereal?
So with cereal, so it's interesting you say that. So my one colleague who has type 1, who's also a dietitian, she found that almond milk is low, that it tends to help when she eats cereal to spike less. Almond milk, regular almond milk doesn't have much protein. So if you're looking for just doing it because you want like a milk taste, then I think almond milk is fine. But if you're looking for protein to be kind of a source of protein, Silk makes one that's called Silk Protein Milk, which is a mixture of, it has almond, cashew, and it uses green pea in it. And it's still a low carb milk alternative, but it gives you protein. So it's got like 10 grams of protein per cup. So it's very similar to a cow's milk or a soy milk. So that to me, I like Silk Protein. I think it's called protein nut milk as a good option if you're looking for a low carb milk, but that still can provide you with some protein. If you were looking to use the milk, like I said, just to like be a part of your cereal, that you're not looking for it as a protein source, then you really could use, I would say, any almond milk, cashew milk, oat milk, those kind of things I think are fine, because most of them are fortified with calcium. So then I think, you know, it still helps keep your bones strong. Other questions about cereal? No? Okay. I was going to talk a little bit about glycemic index. After all these years, I still don't think it's a crystal clear, easy thing to do. And sometimes I've had providers say, talk about the glycemic index diet, and that doesn't really exist other than, I guess, if you choose low glycemic foods all the time, I guess that would be the diet. But there is some merit. So there are studies that, there it goes. Sorry, my computer took a second. There's some merit to glycemic index, I think, that can help guide you in your food choices and could help with some variability. So, the whole basis of the glycemic index is that foods that digest quicker will make you spike quicker. So that'll have a higher glycemic index value versus if foods take longer to digest, then it gradually is making your blood sugar rise versus this quick spike, and there's less, there's not always full digestion. So fiber would be one of those things that have higher fiber. So you kind of see so what I always like to point out is that starches tend to have the highest glycemic response. And it's based on that, how they are broken down, that they only are broken into glucose versus your dairy and your fruits are broken into two different types of sugar. So not all of it is, for the fruit and the dairy, are directly absorbed as fast. So they tend to have a lower glycemic load that goes into them. Not to say that, juice, if you had orange juice, that would make you rise slower than if you had a potato, if you had rice, but in general, you can kind of think of that it's not as surprising, like cereal, bagels, those tend to spike you more than if you had a piece of fruit. So things that help with it is that when you're having, starchy foods, having a healthy fat and fiber does tend to help lower that glycemic load. So an example would be instead of just doing white, a regular pasta, is trying to use a wheat pasta. So there's your fiber, maybe tossing it in a little bit of olive oil. So there's that healthy fat that can help lower it. And then, having protein with it too. So maybe making sure you do some turkey meatballs or, one thing is that often we find that more cooked and processed foods tend to have a higher GI. You're not going to eat pasta raw, but that's where, if you've seen ever, some people talk about not overcooking your pasta or cooking it and letting it cool to help with the starch. I never tell people I don't know if it's really worth doing that. But I think doing more of your fiber and watching your portion. I think, I know growing up in my house, when we had spaghetti, we just had spaghetti and red sauce. We had no protein with it ever. I think we had vegetables with it, but trying to kind of change that mentality of a plate of spaghetti, maybe just doing a side of spaghetti with some protein and veggies. Once more, I don't think pasta should ever be taken away, just maybe watching portion. And that's just something for everybody. And I do want to talk about with diet and talking about diet for someone with diabetes. But before I did that, one thing we did talk about, I was saying, was that combining a food that's a higher glycemic food with a lower one can help balance it out, balance your levels. That would be an example, would be green peas are lower on that glycemic index than a white potato. So maybe for dinner, instead of just doing steak, potato, and broccoli, maybe you do, instead of doing a baked potato, you do the little red potatoes and actually have some peas on the side and still have broccoli. So you're still cutting out some of that, you're mixing the starches, so you're still enjoying it and getting more variety too. So thinking about those kind of things can help too, or if you were looking at different fruits, people always think of berries tend to be lower and people get really scared of bananas, but what about mixing your berries and banana together? That can help lower that overall glycemic load. And I'm going to actually come out of my screen because I did not create this, but I do like to use, I have a handout that I give that, hold on if I can find it. There it is. This one is a handout that I like because it kind of is like a stoplight, and it doesn't mean red means you never can have, but it helps people. I usually like using this as a way to guide that. If you think about, if you're looking at cereal and you're like, oh, what can we do? Maybe mixing, if you're mixing a higher one with a lower one, like using an all bran flake to mix with your Cheerios could help lower that spike. Like thinking about that. Or if you're like, well, we like Special K, so maybe instead of always buying Cheerios, you buy Special K and see how that, if it works. I usually tell people try things. It doesn't, there's no guarantee, but it's worth kind of, it is trying things and seeing what works well and kind of weighing what's worth it too. I'm not saying that everybody is going to want to start just eating Fiber One cereal all the time. It may not be appealing or worth it, or could make adult or child upset. So thinking, kind of weighing it out. And thinking about like with your fruits and things that, you know, saying, okay, bananas tend to be a little bit higher on that list of glycemic load. Like I was saying, maybe mix it. Maybe I'll make a fruit salad instead of just eating a banana, where I mix that banana with some raspberries and peaches. And that to me isn't, hopefully thinking of it as a sacrifice, still sounds really tasty. It kind of get a little bit more creative. And same with like your starches. Sometimes I tell families, don't think of it as, oh, well, you have diabetes, so we can't eat this rice, but kind of using it as this is a good time for all of us as a family to try a new food. So it could be that if you've, you know, we really like white rice, but, you know, we're going to look at different grains. Maybe we could try wild rice, or we could try barley together as a family. Sometimes I tell people when you're trying to make it a little bit more fun, you could maybe choose one night a week where you guys try a new food. And this could be, it doesn't have to always be something that's considered a low glycemic food, but this is something that's helpful for children and adults to just expand your diet so you don't feel like you have to eat the same thing. But maybe sometimes it is something that it tends to be a little bit lower on the glycemic load that you had never thought to try it. And maybe you're going to try it tonight. And it could be a fun thing for everybody in the household. And like I said, it's something that's good for everybody to try, so you don't have to think of it as just for diabetes.
I'm going to jump in, Meredith. I'm not sure if you were trying to show us the handout, but it didn't come up on the shared.
Oh, you can't see it. I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Let me change. Thank you for telling me. I did not know. I'm sitting here talking like you all can see it. I'm so sorry. Can you see it now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, guys. So I was saying, this is a handout I did not create, like I said, but I do like giving to families to just give them a feel for, you know, seeing if you eat a lot of things in the red, which so it tends to be higher, is that can you find stuff in maybe the yellow or the green that you like, or you'd be willing to try, and then see what it does to your blood sugar. Does it do anything? Does it help? If it doesn't, then, and you don't like it, that maybe it's not worth it. But just to give you, I feel like give people different options too. Do people have questions about the glycemic index or things for the foods on here?
Can you just scroll down a little bit on that? I just want to
Absolutely.
just taking a screenshot of like the bottom half.
Well, I'm not sure if, because if Ian has everybody's email, I'm happy to share it with whoever is interested. If that's
yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll be happy
I would
to
love a copy of that also.
Yeah,
Like
so
us.
what I'll just do is I'll email it to Ian, and then maybe Ian, if you're okay with that, would you be willing to send it to the families?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you want to stick your emails in the chat, I'll get those, but I'll also put them on our website and on our Facebook page and things like that for folks.
Great. Let's see. Does anybody have any other things for glycemic index or just other foods that they're wondering about? Does anybody have questions about doing a ketogenic diet, or curious, or have been told they should or do?
I've definitely had it recommended to us, and I'd say we try to stay pretty low carb, but probably I wouldn't consider it ketogenic.
Do you guys have a certain amount you stick within a day?
No, I try to stay, well, typically we stay under 100 carbs per day, but it's a little, there's a little bit of a challenge because I have split custody of my son. So he's with me one week and his mom another week. And I think we definitely treat it differently. So I'd say it's lower carb, week on, week off type situation.
And then Tim, did you say you yourself have diabetes?
No.
No. Okay. Sorry.
Oh, I do not. My son.
Just your son. Okay. Sorry. I think in the beginning I thought I heard, okay. So just your son. Okay. All right. So yeah, I think, what I usually I do like to usually go over. So in general, I myself don't typically recommend what would be considered ketogenic for children, but I do like to usually share. It's not, but I usually like to give a feel for what I'm, what is considered actually keto is, well, there's technically not a set term, but for considered, very low carb is usually sticking with 20 to 40 grams in one day. And so that means you usually do have to avoid a good amount of foods. Not to say that it's people pick and choose, and there's lots of products out there now that make it kind of a little easier but things that I usually go over pros and cons of it, because I think if you're still able to get all of your nutrients, then, you can find different ways to manage diabetes. So my big thing is that when going, some benefits that people have found with low carb is that if somebody has a weight issue, and this tends to be more in the adult world, it can help with weight loss. Why people tend to go to it, you do have less glycemic variability. You have less of these ups and downs. If you're taking in less carbs, there's less carbs to figure out what it's going to do to your blood sugar. So for people that are more robust, who might be obese or overweight, when you're on something that's a low carb, it does tend to help decrease insulin resistance. And people do usually, like I said, if there's less variability, you're more likely to see a lower A1C. However, there are some risks with doing a very low carb diet. So individuals can be at risk for different deficiencies, like your calcium, your thiamine, your different B vitamins and iron, just because you're tending to avoid food groups that tend to be really rich in it. For children, we do worry a little bit about growth. Not to say you can't grow on something that's a lower carb, but a lot of times, especially after individuals are diagnosed with diabetes, there's been this weight loss, and then we want to see a weight gain to kind of get back to what was their normal growth curve. And sometimes that can be really hard. And we're concerned also with that linear growth, that up growth, that if you need carbs for helping a lot of times with growth. And if you're having a lower carb, you're at risk also for a little bit harder time concentrating. If the ketogenic diet is not done in I don't want to say it like a healthy way, but in a way, if you're not really thinking about the types of fats you're using to substitute for carbs, you're at risk for high cholesterol or different cholesterol levels. And that's something we have to be super careful with, because people with diabetes are at much greater risk for heart disease. So kind of that thinking, and it's hard if you have a young child, you're not really thinking about heart disease right now, but it is still something you think about. But also that's why people think about low carb, because they're thinking about long-term keeping that A1C in check.
I just failed a stress test last Friday. I just got word from my cardiologist that I have to have a heart catheterization this Monday.
So yeah, you're seeing it, you've had.
I'm only 41. I'm like, I thought older people get that.
Well, and it also depends on family history too. So it's not I wouldn't just say, I wouldn't just blame diabetes, kind of thing, but there's a lot of factors. But yeah, so, I think this is hard, right? There's so many things with diabetes that you're trying to make the right decision. And it's, the decision. So I read one thing that people with diabetes have an extra, at least 50 decisions a day they're making. No, it was more than that. Sorry, I forget. It is a lot. It is a huge number that someone without diabetes has to think about versus someone with diabetes. So like when you go to eat, you're not just like, oh, I really want to eat this banana and you go ahead and eat it. You have to think about, what's it going to do to my blood sugar? How many carbs is it? Should I dose now? Should I wait? There's all these different factors that makes it so much harder. And that's why, in general, I like to talk about pros and cons of doing something like a low carb diet, because it's not just easy to say, yes, do it, no, do it. There's different things you have to think about, and does it work? The other thing I do want to mention about doing a very low carb diet is my big thing is especially with children, is you're at risk for encouraging kind of a disordered eating or disordered food behaviors. And the reason I say that is, if your child who has diabetes or adult, you have diabetes and you feel like you never can eat the same thing, it can also lead to where you get this fear of, oh my God, if I eat this, piece of bread, what's it going to do to my blood sugar? And it can cause anxiety, or you become so fixated on what you are eating that if you were in a situation where you did say you were at a friend's house and all they had was that you were going to eat pizza, what does that do to your mental health? So thinking about those things. But one thing I found is that there was a study that was done talking about finding a good middle ground. So thinking about, I usually tell people, try not to go less than 100 a day, because the one study I found was, a good study was that when you're keeping it to 100 a day, still had improved blood sugar control and variability without increasing your cardio, your lipid levels or your cholesterol levels, and not having as much lows. So kind of trying to find that. Me personally, I usually tell people 50% of your calories should come from carbs. So that is more than usually 100 for children. Usually you're going to see me say, probably kids would have around, someone who's probably 8 years old, I'm going to say they probably should have at least 200 a day. And I also like people to know it's not just grams of carbs, it's the type of carbs. So I usually tell people you could have a small brownie that is only 20 grams of carbs, or you could have a banana and it's 30 grams of carbs. That banana gives you fiber, it gives you nutrients, vitamins and minerals, things that are really important for your body, but it's higher carb than that brownie. But that brownie doesn't do anything other than it tastes good. So it's trying to think about the type of carb that you're doing. Are you having a sweet potato that is 40 grams of carbs? Okay. Or did you just sit and have a plate of bacon, which is not good for your, heart, but it is no carb technically. So trying to find a balance is important, and thinking about your type of carb too, and not just grams of carbs. Big thing is if you have foods that are what I call troublesome, like cereal, is trying to find ways to eat, how can you incorporate it in a way that you can enjoy it without it always, wreaking havoc on your blood sugar. So like I was saying, these are kind of the ranges that I usually give for children, and also finding that, if you yourself or your child tends to eat lower carb just because that's naturally what you prefer, then I don't necessarily think you have to force carbs, but I do think not fearing carbs is important, in that if you find that when we eat more carbs, we have higher numbers, then that's something I definitely think is trying to find a way to troubleshoot. What do we need to do? Do we need to cut it out, or do we need to try to pair it with something? Do we need to figure out how we're dosing it? So those kind of things I think are also important, especially for children. And when I think somebody here said that there's their child has diabetes and there's multiple siblings, is finding that inclusion. So because inclusion is really important. I want to, encourage healthy foods, but framing it as you encourage healthy food choices, not because you have diabetes, but because it's for everyone. So if you think everybody should eat, if you think your child with diabetes should be eating wheat bread, everybody in the house should be eating wheat bread. And it is, eating healthier because of diabetes can help with others being healthy, but it is something that I think trying to have everybody having similar things. So if that means sometimes your kid with diabetes has cereal, to me, I would rather that than him or her never having cereal and the siblings having it, and that child really, diabetes already can suck, so they don't need another reason to hate diabetes, kind of thing. And moderation is huge. And you have to teach moderation whether you have diabetes or not. So, it would be great if every kid packed just carrot sticks in their lunch instead of chips. But the reality is that kids want to have chips with their friends. So thinking about your portion maybe is the key thing. Doing a small bag of chips, or even if you portion them out, so that way they can still, sit with their friends and have some chips, and not feel like, oh, all I ever get is carrot sticks when all my friends are getting those fun bags of chips. Kind of trying to find those ways. So inclusion, I think, is really important. And like we kind of talked about, is that what happens when you exclude is that you're, the restriction, which can lead to sneaking. And it may not happen right away with sneaking. It can come later where kids feel like, or even teens feel like they can't tell you that they want something because they feel like they're going to be told no, they shouldn't, and so then they ended up having it, and they may not even dose for it because then they're worried that you're going to find out that they just ate it. So kind of having that discussion of, how do we fit in treats? It doesn't mean, okay, you can just eat, 2 bowls of ice cream every night, but finding a way to include ice cream in a moderate, safe way. Okay. Other things for children, and I'm sorry, I know there's other people on here that definitely are not children, but things just to keep in mind, I think, for self-care is thinking about expectations, is that thinking about what you kind of want, how to encourage your child to be kind of a part of their diabetes in a positive way of letting them kind of take ownership, but age appropriately. So I usually just like to show this chart that thinking about like, when should your child be kind of taking charge of things? And everybody's different. These are not hard stops of when they turn 13, they must be doing these things, but just things to think about is that involving them so that they kind of feel empowered and open to their diabetes, and they start learning so that by the time they get to be 40 or 50, that they feel good about knowing what foods work well in their body, what doesn't work well, and that they can feel confident. And this is also important for when they want to go to friends' house, that you can feel good that they can go to friends' houses and know what to do. So just, I think involvement at any age, whether it be that they help choose where they want their injection or their site change, or having them help look at a box to look at the serving size, I think can be really important. And that can help them like have a positive feeling with diabetes, that they're taking part of this and they're being independent. Let's see. Okay, so I've done a lot of talking. Other things or other questions people have, or things that you want to talk about, or if you want to ask each other different questions. Or if anybody has things that you wanted to ask me or comment about what I've said, I'm definitely very open. Or if you're wondering about things that, what I think about or how I counsel, I'm very open.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Meredith. I am type 0, so I'm constantly learning, with all of our staff and our medical team, and definitely picked up a lot of really great information, not just to bring back to camp, but I think to even try here in my home life with very picky eaters in an 11-year-old and a 3-year-old who have vastly different ways of eating and stuff. So yeah, that was, at least for me, very, very informational and appreciative of all of that stuff.
Great.
Any questions from some of the folks? I know we've got some campers on here as well, or families of campers. Any other additional thoughts or questions?
Thank you, Meredith.
Sure, thanks.
This was all really helpful. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. I just really wanted to kind of see what foods would be good for like weight loss, but I think I have an idea after like the glycemic index and the low carb kind of stuff you talked about.
Yeah, I think, if you're looking for, with weight, also are going to be big because you're feeling satisfied versus sometimes things that are low calorie won't keep you full as long. So fiber and protein is definitely going to be big, and exercise is also really important. Also, for anybody, not skipping meals is going to be huge because that helps keep your metabolism burning. So I always think about your body like a fire, that you have to give it wood every so often to keep it burning. And if you give it wood all at once, it kind of fizzles out. If you don't feed it wood for a long time, it also fizzles out. So it's really important not skipping meals. Planned meals and snacks are important. And this is important for, I would say, for kids too, is you're planning you don't have to be rigid with times of meals and snacks, but it's really important to kind of have it planned. So kids can kind of feel, they know when they're going to be hungry. They kind of learn hunger cues. And also they know that this is dinner, or this is lunch, and snack is not until like 2:30. So I'm going to eat, because we're not going to just start grazing at 1 o'clock. Those kind of things can be helpful. And for diabetes prediction of blood sugar, if you kind of space out your meals with planned snacks, it kind of helps you figure out your blood sugar levels, versus if you kind of just keep adding on to eating or going a long time without eating.
I always heard that the breakfast is supposed to be the biggest meal of the day. Do you agree with that? Or is that kind of a myth?
Well, what I think it is that if you eat your biggest meal, then you're most active, right? You're starting your day. So you're most likely to be the most mobile and moving. So, but I think breakfast is one of the hardest ones for people to eat. I usually, especially with, any age, but especially my teenagers, I am just trying to get them to eat something small. But I think that's a lot for people, is that like, I usually tell people, even if you can just drink a glass of milk, that's a good start to kind of start your day. Because when you skip meal, like if you skip breakfast, you may not even by lunch, but that afternoon time is when people tend to like go hog wild with like, I'm starving. What can I get my hands on? It's snack items, because that's what's quick and easy. But if you kind of are eating a little bit more consistently, then hopefully you don't feel that ravenous. So breakfast could be helpful, but my feeling, it doesn't have to be the largest, but it could be, because then you do have a chance also to, the only thing is with diabetes, like if you had your biggest meal at breakfast and if you go high, then you might feel like you're chasing your high blood sugar all day. So it's like it could be a larger one. I wouldn't necessarily make it your largest carb meal. Maybe lunch would be, but it all depends on definitely your activity level. If you were like, oh, well, no, in the mornings I'm sitting at my computer doing my work, I don't really get a chance to move until the afternoon, then maybe like lunchtime would be better to be bigger.
I just wanted to say, this doesn't really have anything to do with what you talked about today, but if anyone has medical mutual insurance, to look into the diabetes wellness program. If anyone doesn't know about that, it's really great for covering our testing supplies. You enroll in the program and they do, monthly updates and that kind of stuff, but they cover all testing supplies and pump and sensor and all that stuff. So it's really worth looking into if you have that insurance.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Meredith. Again, learned a ton, and I hope you folks did as well. We'll continue to keep doing these kind of informational support group type of things and pick up a little steam as we chug along. So the next one's in March, I believe. So keep an eye out for that stuff. If you have any additional follow-up questions, something you forgot to ask or like clarification on, please let me know. I can pass that along very easily to Meredith, and I'm sure she's very happy to help with those. And
Always.
So send that to me. Be happy to get that along. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining us. Have a great rest of the evening, and hopefully we'll see you at camp this summer. So.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.
Thank you.